And today we're getting into something really fascinating.
We are. We're doing a deep dive into what you might call one of history's great strategic pivots. How the Apostle Paul managed to turn his literal physical chains into, one of the most effective communication networks of his entire era.
That's absolutely right. The sources we've got here, they give us this really profound theological and biographical look at Paul's ministry.
Right.
We're drawing heavily from what he wrote while he was in prison, the letters people often call the prison epistles.
Philippians, Colossians, Ephesians, and Philemon.
Exactly those.
And our mission today, it's not just, a historical exercise. It's really to get inside the mindset of a leader under intense pressure.
A sense of responsibility that was just off the charts.
Completely. And how he transformed that suffering into a strategic advantage, all while communicating this breathtaking idea of the unsearchable riches of Christ.
So the big question is,
yeah, how does a life in maximum adversity become a channel for maximum influence? Okay, so let's unpack that motivation first. The sources describe a man who feels this immense responsibility. It honestly sounds less like a goal and more like a crushing burden.
it really does. He didn't just start these communities and then, walk away. He felt like he owned their spiritual end product.
He was invested.
Deeply invested. He talks about his desire that all his labor, all the travel, the sleepless nights would not be in vain. He wanted to be able to look back and genuinely rejoice.
So it's the ultimate measure of, say, successful mentorship.
I think so. But the sources also point to this profound anxiety in him, which is fascinating for someone we think of as so confident.
Right, and it went beyond just seeing his work fail. He felt like his own salvation was somehow tied to this.
That intense sense of duty is the key to his whole drive. He was constantly worried about whether the churches were inheriting, as the sources put it, the mold of the human instead of the divine. Meaning he feared that if he didn't do his job right, or if they didn't follow through, the result would be a fragile, human-led organization instead of something divinely energized.
That's a serious anxiety about quality control.
It is. It's immense pressure.
So how did he manage that? That kind of weight sounds paralyzing. How do you not just burn out completely?
He focused on action.
Yeah.
He understood this universal spiritual idea, the principle of decay.
Okay.
He believed that any God-given power, any truth, it just decays and perishes if it's not used. If truth isn't lived, if it's not shared, it loses its life-giving power.
So it's not just about the message being rejected. It's about it becoming inert, stagnant.
Precisely. If you have something valuable, you have to distribute it or it just atrophies right where it is. It's a critical lesson in spiritual logistics.
Which explains his teaching style.
Yes. It's why a few big sermons were never going to be enough for him. He insisted that believers had to be taught line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little and there a little.
It's incremental.
Yeah.
It's ongoing.
It's a continuous process, not a one-time event. All of it was aimed at this one massive, ultimate goal.
Which the sources describe as presenting every person perfect in Christ.
Enabling them to be blameless and harmless without rebuke. It's a huge undertaking.
It is. It shows that for him, success wasn't about numbers in a room. It was about the integrity and maturity of every single soul. And this is where the story just flips completely. It gets so counterintuitive.
Paradox of suffering.
Exactly. Common sense says prison stops your work. But for Paul, the sources say that when his liberty was taken, his influence actually became wider and more lasting.
It's incredible. His physical chains became his spiritual leverage. We're talking about the period around AD 60 to 62. He's under house arrest in Rome, writing these hugely important letters.
And just to be clear, this wasn't some comfortable confinement. He was chained 247 to a Praetorian guard.
And these weren't, friendly security guards. One early writer described soldiers like this as behaving like wild beasts.
So you're chained to someone who might be abusive, psychologically grueling.
It was constant forced proximity. But here's the pivot. Those chains, his bonds, became a badge of courage. They attracted curiosity in a way his sermons might not have.
You have to imagine it. Every few hours, a new elite Roman soldier rotates in and is literally chained to this famous prisoner for their entire shift.
Talk about a captive audience.
The ultimate captive audience, right. You're forced to just sit there and witness this man's dignity, his patience, his joy.
It's a much more powerful testimony than any public speech could ever be.
Absolutely.
And the sources confirm it. Through this captivity, the truth found its way into the highest levels of Roman power, into the royal palace.
He even says it right. In Philippians, he sends greetings from believers in Caesar's household.
The restriction opened doors that freedom never could have.
Yeah.
People who would never show up to a public sermon were suddenly his audience.
And this wasn't a one-off thing. We see this pattern earlier, too, in Philippi.
Right. Paul and Silas are beaten, thrown in the deepest part of the prison, their feet locked in stocks.
The logical reaction there is despair. Total despair.
But what were they found doing? Praying and singing hymns to God in the middle of the night. That radical act of joy, it changes everything.
It leads to the earthquake, the conversion of the jailer and his whole family. They were living that command to rejoice always.
Turning a literal dungeon into a sanctuary.
And we can't just gloss over the scale of what he endured to maintain that mindset. The list in the sources is almost unbelievable.
It is. Tribulation, distress, persecution, famine, hunger, beatings, homelessness, shipwrecks.
Danger from robbers, from his own people, from false believers. I mean, it's everything.
Yet he maintained that in all these things, we are more than conquerors. The adversity was the platform.
So the trials weren't obstacles in front of the mission.
They were the very mechanism for the mission. His ability to stay focused and joyful through the absolute worst is what gave him the credibility to reach people like the Praetorian Guard.
Okay, so suffering created the platform. It gave him the spotlight. But what was the actual message being broadcast from those chains?
This is where his writing just becomes so profoundly hopeful. The core insight he's stressing, while literally in chains, is one of boundless potential.
Which is?
That the riches of God's grace are completely unrestricted. He says that every single person we're willing to receive, every person would be filled with God's Spirit.
So there's no shortage on God's end.
Absolutely none. The only limiting factor is our own willingness.
That reframes everything. It puts the focus back on individual potential. He makes it so personal, doesn't he?
He does. He talks about the privilege that every single soul has to be a living channel for these unsearchable riches of Christ.
And he says that's what Christ desires most agents, conduits, to represent his character to the world.
He puts it so beautifully in his letter to the Ephesians. He says, God, who is rich in mercy, rescued us when we were spiritually dead in sins.
And he raises us up not just to rescue us, but to have us sit in heavenly places.
And for what purpose? To show the exceeding riches of his grace.
We're meant to be living advertisements for this unlimited spiritual bank account.
Exactly. And that leads to what the sources call the climax of privilege, what Paul prayed his converts would achieve.
Okay.
He prayed that they'd be rooted and grounded in love, that they would comprehend the breadth, length, depth, and height of it all.
And ultimately,
to be filled with all the fullness of God.
To be filled with the fullness of God. I mean, that's the maximum possible attainment. That sounds impossible unless the resource really is unlimited.
And that fullness is tied directly back to joy. If you truly grasp this unlimited grace, your life has to be one of faith, of victory, and joy in God.
Which is why from a prison cell he can write, "Rejoice in the Lord always."
That joy wasn't just a feeling. It was the practical strength he drew from knowing the well would never run dry, even when the world had locked him away.
All right, let's pivot from the theological power source to Paul's actual operational blueprint. Because this wasn't just mystical suffering, it was incredibly strategic.
It really was, and his humility was a core part of that strategy.
How so?
Well, he took on the lowliest duties. He insisted on working his trade tent making to support himself.
Even though he had the right to be supported by the churches.
Right, and that did two things. First, it shut down any accusations that he was in it for the money, and second, it gave him what the sources call a rarer wisdom.
A rare wisdom? What's that?
It's the ability to quickly understand and sympathize with common people. When you're working alongside them, sharing their struggles, you build trust, you get them.
You gain instant relatability.
Exactly. And then there was his geographic strategy. He wasn't just wandering, he was targeting high-traffic, high-influence hubs.
Distribution nodes for the message.
Perfect way to put it. Take Philippi again.
Yeah.
He chose it because it was the chief city of that part of Macedonia. It had a special legal status, ius Italicum, so its citizens had Roman privileges.
And crucially,
It was on the Via Egnatia, the main superhighway connecting Rome and the West with the East.
so he wasn't just preaching, he was identifying logistical choke points, the modern equivalent of a major airport hub or a data center.
That's it. You plant a church in Philippi, and the message just travels naturally along the main trade and travel routes across the continent.
And he was strategic with people, too, not just places.
Oh, absolutely. He invested heavily in training up his co-workers. Young men like Timothy and Epaphras, He prepared them for leadership.
He was building a sustainable organization.
Yes, installing local officers like overseers and deacons. He wasn't just starting movements. He was building institutions.
Which was so important when dealing with internal threats. I'm thinking of his letter to the Colossians. He warns them about all these philosophical errors.
He did. He was addressing the intellectual challenges of his day, and they sound, well, very modern.
Like what?
The sources list things like higher criticism, questioning the Bible's reliability, evolution, in the sense of progress without God, and esoteric things like spiritualism, theosophy, and pantheism.
All ideas that, in one way or another, diminish the uniqueness of Christ.
Precisely. They offer a more complicated intellectual path instead of simple faith. For Paul, the test for any doctor was simple and unwavering. Christ crucified, risen, and ascended. He was the only litmus test you needed.
And we see that strategic genius in one of the most personal, high-risk situations. The runaway slave, Onesimus.
Masterful, just masterful. Roman law demanded he return the slave to his owner, Philemon,
A move that could have gotten him killed.
and damage the church's reputation. So instead of trying to abolish the whole system head-on, he worked within the relationship. He appealed to Philemon's heart, not legal arguments.
Urging him to receive Onesimus back, not as a slave, but as a brother.
That's radical. He was changing the culture from the inside out.
Yeah.
He was placing the moral obligation of Christian brotherhood above the legal status of ownership.
A quiet, powerful, and incredibly strategic revolution. What an extraordinary study. I mean, resilience, strategic clarity. We've seen Paul's conviction, his relentless focus, from logistics to humility, and this ability to maintain joy through it all.
The core lesson here for you, as you listen, is that paradox we keep coming back to. The greatest victories, the widest influence, they can happen when you feel the most restricted.
So great difficulty isn't just something to be endured.
No, it can become a surprising strategic advantage.
So here is the provocative thought for you to carry forward from all this. Paul's trials, his chains, they didn't stop his message. They personalized it, they authenticated it, and they broadcast it to places his freedom never could have reached. So if you view your own inevitable trials, your chains, whether they're financial or health-related or professional setbacks, if you see them not as barriers, but as the very mechanism through which your influence is amplified and your character is revealed.
What new mission field opens up in your own life right now?
Exactly.
Thank you for diving deep with us into the riches of this material. We'll see you next time.